Well, Democratic Alliance Eastern Cape Provincial Legislature MPL, Dr. Vicky Knoetze, joins us now to give us a reaction to this visit, this Imbizo, and certainly the visit to the Eastern Cape by the President. Dr. Knoetze, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with this. The impact that you think the President's oversight visit to the Eastern Cape will have, are you optimistic about what it could achieve for service delivery in the province?
To answer your question, we are not very optimistic about this visit. As the previous speaker has said, there is a complete lack of political will, as well as accountable and ethical leadership. So this visit of President Ramaphosa is actually a very unique opportunity for President Ramaphosa to engage with the provincial executive as well as the Premier about the challenges faced by the people in the Eastern Cape. It's an opportunity to do real introspection in terms of the lived reality of people in the poorest and most unequal province in the country.
You know, you talk about it being the poorest and most unequal province in the country, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But I want us to talk of timing. You've got this visit taking place not long after the Auditor General revealed some really disturbing findings about the state of things in the Eastern Cape. The AG, while speaking to the National Council of Provinces, is saying that, and listen to this, 97% of cases where there were irregularities in financial reports saw no actions taken. I mean, that is a big number. And perhaps you can talk to us about why the AG would have such startling findings.
That's absolutely true. This comes just after not only the AGSA report to the Select Committee of Finance in the National Council of Provinces, but also after some very damning findings by SCOPA just the week before that. And you are quite correct when you say that, because only in 3% of the cases that the AGSA found into around 200 million rand of suspected fraud and corruption in the Eastern Cape, only 3% of those cases were the actual consequences. What was very disturbing about the AGSA findings as well was that in terms of infrastructure-related claims, specifically in terms of housing and roads in the Eastern Cape, they found that there was no evidence to substantiate those claims. And that is also over and above the 500 million rand of unauthorized expenditure, the 2.7 billion rand of irregular expenditure, and then the 200 million rand of suspected fraud.
There's a program in the Department of Education, the Provincial Department of Education, in the Eastern Cape called the Public Ordinary School Education Program. And maybe you can unpack for us what happened there, where the AG says 100% of that program's budget was spent. All the money was spent, but they only achieved 20% of what they intended to achieve. When the President visits the Eastern Cape, who does he talk to? How do you get that right?
Yes, that is absolutely true. The AGSA found that there were also unsubstantiated claims and unsubstantiated expenditure in various of the education department's programs. In fact, the Department of Education has a 80 billion rand backlog on infrastructure in the Eastern Cape, which is extremely worrying. But this again links to the fact that there are high incidences of fraud, corruption, as well as mismanagement and poor governance within Eastern Cape departments.
And maybe you can talk to me about what it is that's going on there. The Department of Health had not achieved 54% of what it had intended to do with its budget. The Department of Transport had not achieved 28%. Human Settlements had not achieved 27% of what it was supposed to do for service delivery. What's the common denominator?
So the common denominator is that in the Eastern Cape departments, we've got high incidences of expenditure on compensation of employees, high expenditure on consultants, which means that if the departmental budgets are spent spent mostly on aspects like that, there's very little left for service delivery. You will also see that there's a large amount of infrastructure projects within the Department of Health and the Department of Public Works and Education, which is incomplete. So the DI has been asking for many, many years that they blacklist non-performing and poor-performing contractors to ensure that departments, not just in the Eastern Cape, but across the country, don't keep making use of the same poor-performing or non-performing contractors in these instances. So the fact is that there's less and less money for service delivery. So you would also see that the Department of Health and Education, which are, by the way, the departments with the two biggest budgets in the Eastern Cape, accruals are so high in these two departments, like I say, almost nothing left for service delivery. But in fact, the accruals in the Department of Health makes up almost 17% of the entire provincial budget.
You talked about how it is the worst performing province in the country. I mean, that's a big statement to make. How do you characterize that? And I'm talking about in how it impacts the daily lives of people in the Eastern Cape from your view.
Yes, everything centers around the lived reality of the people in the Eastern Cape. So why I say it's the worst performing province in the Eastern Cape and also the poorest and most unequal. So let's start with some of the major problems in terms of the true state of the Eastern Cape. The fact is that in terms of unemployment, which is one of our biggest challenges, it's the second highest in the country, with the expanded rate at 47.6%, which means that almost one in two people in our province don't have a job and don't know where their next meal is going to come from. To make matters even worse, we just came out of a recession in the previous quarter where we contracted for 3 consecutive quarters and only managed to come out of a recession by 0.1% in the last quarter, but yet MEC Mvoko projects that the Eastern Cape will grow by 2.8% in 2025, which is just completely unsubstantiated. That, together with high incidences of corruption, the Eastern Cape province, by the way, owes the SIU 119 million rand. Then, of course, we've got the situation with the extremely high crime rate in the Eastern Cape, with the highest incidences of murder, 19 people being murdered on a daily basis in this province. We've got massive problems in terms of healthcare. We all know the state of hospitals in the Eastern Cape, where it has actually become a death sentence to have to go to a public hospital in this province. Massive infrastructure backlogs, but also we've got massive failures of infrastructure, where infrastructure in terms of water, wastewater, and roads are collapsing across the province. Service delivery is also a major issue in the Eastern Cape. We've got about a third of our municipalities in distress, half of our district municipalities in distress, and as you know, that has a major economic impact as the businesses disinvest in our small towns, and unemployment rates getting even higher as you go out of the metro areas in the province. So to substantiate what I've said, in a nutshell, that is why the Eastern Cape is the poorest and most unequal province.
Yeah, and the reason why I think it's important to highlight the Eastern Cape, the poorest and most unequal province in the country. You also have this other label that the province has, known to us as well as the home of the legends, right? I mean, just the irony of that, the Eastern Cape being the province that, saw the birthplace of former President Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Steve Biko, and so many more. It just, I suppose, to emote a little bit. But now the question is, what now? The president's there. What are the outcomes as opposition, as the Democratic Alliance, that you think the president should, be actioning here? You've called for a commission of inquiry.
Yes, we've called for a provincial commission of inquiry into the Auditor General findings as well as the scope of findings. The fact is, and the sad reality is, that the Eastern Cape has so much potential. We've got over 800-kilometer coastline, which is great in terms of prospects related to the oceans economy. We've got 3 harbors, two in Gqeberha and one in Buffalo City. We've got the great landscapes of the Karoo. We've got lush forests. We've got everything going for us in terms of tourism. We've got the automotive industry. We've got agriculture. We've got all the ingredients to really make the people of this province prosper. What we would expect from the president's visit is a really stern engagement in terms of engaging with the Eastern Cape Provincial Executive as well as the Premier. And as the previous speaker has said, there has to be accountable and ethical leadership. It is time for President Ramaphosa to get tough on what is happening in the Eastern Cape. And if at the end of the day that means heads must roll, then heads must roll.
Dr. Vicky Knoetze, the DA leader in the Eastern Cape Legislature. Thank you so much for speaking to us. We'll, of course, be watching as the President continues that 2-day visit to the Eastern Cape. I did emote a little bit earlier, and I made the example of the Eastern Cape being the home of the legends, mentioning Bishop Desmond Tutu, but, of course, he was born in Klerksdorp, needing to clarify that for the sake of our viewers and for myself.